Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, where we explore the darkest corners of reality. Tonight, I bring you the 10 scariest true stories of 2024. These tales, shared by those who have lived through them, will make you question what is real and what lies in the shadows. Now, let's begin. It was a chilly March evening in 2024 when Sarah found herself driving home from a friend's house down a fog-covered road. It was a path she had driven many times, but that night something felt different. The road was eerily quiet, and the mist was so thick it seemed to swallow her headlights. She turned up the radio to drown out the unsettling silence, but within seconds, the music dissolved into static. She tried to adjust the dial, but nothing changed. And that's when she heard it, a soft whisper from the back seat. Her heart raced as she glanced over her shoulder, but the back seat was empty, or so it seemed. As she continued driving, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were soft at first, but soon became frantic, like a child calling out for help. Frightened, Sarah pulled over at the nearest gas station. She checked the back seat, the trunk, every inch of her car, but there was no one there. Just as she was about to close the door, she noticed something on the fogged-up window of the back seat. There was a small, child-sized handprint, and that's when she remembered she didn't have any children. In April 2024, John had just moved into his dream home, a beautiful old house with plenty of character. But like many old homes, it had its quirks: footsteps in the attic, doors that creaked open on their own. John chalked it up to the house settling until the day he ventured into the basement. The basement was cluttered with old boxes left by the previous owners. As John rummaged through them, he felt an unsettling chill in the air. It wasn't long before he sensed it, a presence lurking just out of sight. He brushed it off, telling himself it was just his imagination. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a shadow, darker than the rest of the room, standing perfectly still. John's flashlight flickered, plunging the room into darkness. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Just as he fumbled to turn the light back on, he heard it, soft breathing, coming from the corner of the room. The same corner where he'd seen the shadow. He bolted for the stairs, but just as he reached the door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Trapped in the dark, with the sound of breathing growing louder, John knew he wasn't alone. The shadow wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was getting closer. In June 2024, Emily began receiving strange phone calls late at night. The number was always unknown, and the voice on the other end was distorted. It was as though someone or something was trying to communicate through the static. At first, the voice was garbled, impossible to understand. But after several nights of receiving these calls, the words became clearer. "Emily, I'm closer than you think." Terrified, Emily would hang up, blocked the number, but the calls kept coming. One night, after the voice whispered her name for the 100th time, there was a knock on her door. She froze. She hadn't ordered anything, and no one had announced they were coming. Slowly, she approached the door, but when she opened it, no one was there. On the ground outside her apartment door was her phone, which she had left inside on the table just moments before. As she picked it up, the screen lit up with a single message: "Look behind you." She turned, heart pounding, but the apartment was empty. In July 2024, Rebecca had always been drawn to antique stores. One day she found a vintage doll she simply had to have. It was old, with porcelain features and a creepy smile. But from the moment it entered her home, strange things began to happen. At first, Rebecca thought the doll was just a coincidence, but soon objects started moving on their own, and she heard faint laughter echoing through the house. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her every move, and its smile grew wider each day. One night, she woke up to the sound of giggling. She found the doll sitting on her bed, its eyes glowing in the dark. When she tried to remove it, it was as if an unseen force resisted her. Desperate, she decided to get rid of it, but every time she tried, it would reappear in her home. The doll seemed to be mocking her every attempt to escape its grasp. In August 2024, Alex received a package he hadn't ordered. The box was plain and unmarked, with no return address. Inside, he found a set of old photographs and a handwritten note that simply read, "I'm watching you." The photographs were disturbing. Shots of his house, his workplace, and even him walking down the street. Each picture was taken at a different time, and it was clear someone had been watching him for weeks. Alex became paranoid. Convinced that someone was stalking him, he reported the package to the police, but no leads were found. The unsettling feeling that someone was always watching him never left. He began to notice shadowy figures outside his home, and the fear that had started with the package grew into a constant, gnawing terror. In September 2024, Lisa noticed her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had been missing for days. Concerned, she went to check on her, but the door was locked and there was no response. Lisa called the authorities, who forced entry into the house. The police found the house in pristine condition. Everything was in its place, and there were no signs of a struggle. It was as if Mrs. Thompson had simply vanished. No trace of her was found, and the case quickly went cold. After the police left, Lisa continued to see strange, shadowy figures near Mrs. Thompson's house. It was as if someone or something was waiting for her to return. The feeling of being watched was constant, and Lisa couldn't shake the fear that Mrs. Thompson's disappearance was linked to something far more sinister. In October 2024, Mark and Julia bought a vintage painting from an estate sale. The painting was of a somber-looking man in 19th century attire. They hung it in their living room, thinking it would add character to their home. Strange occurrences began almost immediately. The lights would flicker, and unexplained noises filled the house. The couple felt uneasy, but the real terror began when they noticed that the eyes of the man in the painting seemed to follow their every move. One night, Mark woke up to find the painting missing from the wall. He searched the house and finally found it in the attic, with a chilling message written on the back, "You will join me soon." The terror of the painting was not just in its appearance, but in the malevolent force that seemed to be linked to it. In November 2024, Alex and his friends went camping in a remote area. They stumbled upon an old, seemingly abandoned cabin and decided to spend the night there. The cabin looked ancient, with broken windows and a sagging roof, but it seemed like a perfect adventure. As night fell, they heard strange noises, footsteps, whispers, and creaking doors. They noticed that the cabin's appearance seemed to shift subtly, as if it were alive. The group's excitement turned to fear as they realized they were not alone. When morning came, the cabin had completely vanished. There was no trace of it, and the friends were left in a state of shock. They couldn't explain what had happened, but they knew they had encountered something beyond their understanding. In December 2024, David began hearing his name called from the woods near his home. The voice was distant but unmistakable. He searched the woods but found no one. The calls continued, growing louder and more insistent each night. As the nights went on, David found cryptic messages carved into the trees. The voice took on a more sinister tone, becoming threatening and demanding. David's fear grew, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread every time he heard the voice. He set up cameras to capture whatever was causing the voice, but the footage only showed static and fleeting shadows. The voice grew more persistent, calling him deeper into the woods. David knew he had to confront whatever was tormenting him, but he was terrified of what he might find. In December 2024, Laura checked into a historic hotel, renowned for its eerie reputation. Her room was filled with old-fashioned furniture and had a cold, unsettling atmosphere. She shrugged off the chill, thinking it was just the age of the building. Throughout the night, Laura heard whispers, footsteps, and the creaking of doors. Each sound seemed to come from within the room or just outside her door. Her distress grew as the noises became more intense and relentless. She discovered an old journal in a drawer, detailing the tragic history of the hotel. The final entry described a horrific event that took place in the very room she was staying, a violent death and a spirit that remained trapped within the wall. As the temperature dropped, Laura saw ghostly figures in the mirror. The door to her room locked on its own, trapping her inside. The spirit's whispers grew louder, and Laura knew she had to escape before she became a permanent guest of the haunted hotel. And so, our journey through the darkest corners of 2024 comes to an end. But remember, the night is still young, and the shadows never truly disappear. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with those brave enough to listen. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. You never know who or what might be watching.